We're proud to support the craft of journalism. UBS brings you the latest news from around the world with The Globalist on Monocle Radio. Be part of an international network that brings together leading insights, research and technology across 24 time zones and 12 key financial hubs, with you at the centre of it all. UBS. Advice is our craft.
You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 11th of August 2025 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. Hello, this is The Globalist, broadcasting to you live from Midori House in London. I'm Georgina Godwin. On the show ahead...
You're looking at territory that's been fought over for 3.5 years. So we're looking at that, but we're actually looking to get some back, some swapping. It's complicated.
Talks between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin are slated for Friday in Alaska, but with little or no Ukrainian or European involvement, can anything be achieved? How much of a political risk is this for Trump and Putin? We'll cross to Israel to interrogate the plan for a full military takeover of Gaza City and the domestic and international reaction. We'll rustle through the day's papers and hear about the rise of nationalism in Thailand before joining our security correspondent in our Zurich studio to examine the continuing fallout over the 39% tariffs imposed on Switzerland and specifically what this means for the defence industry. Then,
Europe has to learn to stand on its own feet, and that means for me big-time investments in defence and big-time investments in digital infrastructure.
We'll look at Europe's big tech revolution, get the latest news from Greece, and finally we'll be in Dubai, where the Ozempic craze is spreading, reducing the weight of the population and even shrinking the restaurant menus. That's all ahead here on The Globalist, live from London. First, a look at what else is happening in the news. Israel's military has confirmed it killed Al Jazeera journalist Anas al-Sharif in a Gaza airstrike, claiming he was a Hamas cell leader. Australia says it will recognise a Palestinian state and New Zealand will decide on similar action in September. Donald Trump has pledged to deploy hundreds of National Guard troops to remove homeless people from Washington, D.C. over the objections of local officials. And the presidents of South Korea and Vietnam have agreed to deepen economic and strategic cooperation during a summit in Seoul. Do stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on those stories. Now, Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin will meet this Friday in Alaska in order to reach a deal on Ukraine, which Russia invaded more than 3 years ago, annexing part of provinces in the east of the country, about 20% of the whole. There's likely to be no Ukrainian or European representation at the meeting, and Trump has implied any deal would probably include the loss of Ukrainian territory, which is forbidden by the Ukrainian constitution. Well, I'm joined now from Kyiv by Monocle's Julia Jen and by Jenny Mathers, Senior Lecturer in International Politics at Aberystwyth University. Welcome to you both. Julia, if we could start with you, how has this news been greeted in Kyiv?
Hi, good morning. Well, it's really difficult. I think we've talked so many times before about how for ordinary people here who are kind of going through the throes of this war, it doesn't really feel like anything is going to change substantially from these talks. Like, will it really bring peace? There is this kind of creeping sense of hope. Perhaps it will give some, and it's a kind of almost, people feel bad for feeling this, but will it give some sense of respite for maybe a few months? But there is a very, very clear understanding here that for ordinary people, that Putin doesn't hold his word. And there's a fear that Trump is pushing Ukraine into making compromises that then in the long term will really damage the country's standing. And this is really very much reflected in the papers across the country as well. There's a feeling people are really going into the fine details of what Trump is offering here. And they're really finding that there are no guarantees. There are no, security guarantees, and there's no way that Trump actually is kind of securing Ukraine's future in the long term.
So, Jenny, a couple of things. Why Alaska, and what do we know is on the table? How much detail do we have on what this deal between the US and Russia might look like?
Well, why Alaska? I mean, who knows, really? That's not been made clear at all. I mean, it's somewhere on US soil. It's not Washington. Perhaps, it was judged to be meeting more or less in the middle geographically. But we don't really know. And we also don't really know exactly what might be on the table in terms of these talks. I mean, there's been lots of rumors and leaks and counter leaks and so on. So it looks as though, from what Trump says, that he wants to set up some kind of a so-called land swap, where Ukraine will have to give up some territory that Russia has occupied. But it's not clear exactly what Ukraine might get in return, apart from a ceasefire and possibly a peace deal in the longer term.
I mean, Julia, we know that that's actually against the constitution. Zelensky cannot give away the land that belongs to the Ukrainian people. We also know that he and various European leaders have been in contact over the weekend trying to put together an alternative. What might that look like? How does Kyiv want this settled?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what Ukraine wants here are security guarantees, is some word from Trump that, if Putin will, because he has done repeatedly throughout history, if you look at in the 90s with the Chechen wars, Russia and the Chechens, when they were warring, and Georgia, and then Ukraine as well, in 2014, Ukraine's Crimea was annexed by Russia, and then they launched their kind of covert war in the east of the country, many of the places that they're fighting in now. That all started in 2014, and Ukraine was given guarantees by France, by Germany. They sat down at the negotiation table in Minsk with Russia and Ukraine. So Ukraine and Russia have been brought to the negotiating table before, and people really remember that here, and that's really being brought across in across papers, newspapers here. What Ukraine needs is an absolute ironclad guarantee that inevitably, when Putin breaks this ceasefire, this limited ceasefire that's being talked about, that there will be some sort of protection for Ukraine. I'm not sure what that looks like. I think NATO must be off the table, because that sort of seems beyond the stretch of the imagination of Western leaders for Ukraine to have some sort of protection there. But there must be something where Western leaders will actually act on their word, because they have given their word before. The famous example that everyone brings up all the time is that Ukraine gave up its entire nuclear arsenal, the third biggest in the world, in exchange for territorial integrity, and that were the guarantees from the US, from France, etc. And that territorial integrity has been flaunted, time and time again. So Ukraine has to have a security guarantee, and I think that's what Zelensky is saying.
Jenny, we know that Trump is transactional. What does he want to gain out of any arrangement?
He just wants a deal. He just wants to be able to say he ended the war. He wants to take credit for it, and then to move on to do deals with Russia, basically, economic deals. So Trump does not care at all about details. He doesn't have Ukraine's interest at heart, that's for sure.
I mean, he's threatened to bring in more sanctions against Russia, and certainly we know Europe's pushing for that. He was set to impose punitive secondary measures on Russia's trading partners. Where are we on that and the whole issue of frozen Russian assets?
Well, the Europeans are pushing for frozen Russian assets to be used to support Ukraine. Where we are with secondary sanctions that Trump has threatened is before the deadline of Friday, which he said has expired. He announced secondary sanctions on India. But since the deadline expired on Friday, no word of any more secondary sanctions has been mentioned. And that all seems to have been pushed to the back of ground. And now all the attention is on this meeting in Alaska on Friday.
So, Jenny, what are the political risks for Washington and Moscow in having such a high-profile meeting and then possibly walking away without anything being resolved? Even if they agree with each other, surely they need buy-in from Europe and Ukraine. That's unlikely.
Well, I think for Putin, there are no risks whatsoever. This is all win-win for him. He gets a high-profile meeting directly with the president of the U.S. on U.S. soil, which is unthinkable under Biden. And he gets the opportunity to have a one-on-one with Trump, where he just presents his own point of view, and there are no Ukrainians or Europeans in the room to challenge him. So for Putin, it's a total win. For Trump, well, he shrugs off failure all the time and repackages it as success or just moves on to something else. So I honestly don't see there being any political downside for Trump either. He gets a meeting with Putin, which he's long craved, and maybe they'll do some side deals on other economic things, when they're not talking about Ukraine. So I don't see either of them really risking anything for this.
And Julia, it's not only getting back territory and having a ceasefire that concerns Ukraine. What about returning the thousands of children kidnapped by Russia?
Yes, absolutely. That's, I think, one of the big things. And one thing that we've actually seen, that's a very positive thing that we've seen happening out of the Turkey talks that have been held in the past few months, is the return of prisoners of war who've been held in horrific conditions. The UN sort of kind of expert on torture has written a very important article about this. It was very widely covered in Ukrainian press, detailing how Ukrainian prisoners of war are being held in Russian prisons, and very much children. There was a horrific story that came out a few days ago and was really picked up by papers here, which is about how Russia has launched an online, basically, marketplace of 286 Ukrainian children, where they are listed by their kind of hair color, their eye color, what they like, their hobbies, and basically, a marketplace of Ukrainian children. So you can sort of filter what you like, what you don't like, and then you can kind of choose your perfect child. And that sort of thing is just so painful for Ukrainians here to see. And Ukrainians understand that if any territory is given up to Putin, the people who live there, not all of them will want to evacuate from their homes, because it's a very big ask to leave your home, and you worry about what kind of help you will receive somewhere else. You think, I'll fend for myself. But that's putting a large swathe of the Ukrainian population in harm's way, children being deported to Russia, civilians being taken into Russian prisons. And that's really at the crux, I think, for people here. They feel exposed by these negotiations, exposed to very direct violence and harm. And
Julia, as we wait for these talks to happen, we know there's still violence from both sides. I understand you yourself came under attack this last week.
Yes, absolutely. It was really quite terrifying. I think I've sort of blanked it out mostly, but it was because it was so terrifying. But yes, and what Ukraine is doing. So Russia was targeting their very specific area of Kyiv that I am staying in with my family. And what Ukraine is targeting in Russia, and I think this is the very interesting thing, is gas facilities. So they're really trying to push down Russia's ability to produce gas and oil, because that's obviously, that's what their economy runs on. And there was actually a story this morning. Ukrainian intelligence services have found that Russia is actually preparing themselves for the price of oil to fall down to $40 to $50 a barrel. And that's a historic low for Russia. So they're really trying to prepare their economy. And every night we get reports, Ukraine is striking on a facility here, there, 2,000 kilometers from the border between Ukraine and Russia. So really going in deep into the country. And I think trying to damage that economy, that economical aspect of Russia as much as possible before these negotiations start, because that will really put Ukraine into a stronger position in terms of how exposed, Russia feels economically and how viable it is for Russia to continue this war at the current pace.
Julia, thank you. That was Monocle's Julia Jen in Kyiv. And thank you also to Jenny Mathers, Senior Lecturer in International Politics at Aberystwyth University. This is The Globalist.
Each of us has a craft, a calling that inspires us, whether it's how a coffee is brewed, a chair is built, or how money is looked after. There's a love for the work, a care that compels you forward. For us at UBS, it's about designing a unique outcome for you. Because whatever your craft may be, ours is built around helping you succeed. UBS. Banking is our craft.
Well, so much going on in the world. And to give us an idea of how the papers are covering these various stories, I'm joined in the studio by Simon Brooke, journalist and communications consultant. Simon, of course, here in the UK, there's been lots of coverage of the US Vice President J.D. Vance, who's been here. He's been staying with the Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, and making a lot of appearances, not only in British media, but also in the US.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's an interesting mix of coverage here, both of the lighter side, shall we say, of the the US Vice President deciding to take a holiday in the Cotswolds in the UK, but also some of the more serious things he said as well. I mean, I thought it was interesting over the weekend, the fishing trip he went on with David Lammy, the UK Foreign Secretary, and some of the papers are pointing out or suggesting that there's a real meeting here of minds and a real chemistry that works very well.
They're both very Christian, aren't they?
Well, they are, and this is one of the interesting things that's covered here in the papers. The Telegraph points out that Vance would have visited. Well, he had a special visit to Hampton Court Palace. The palace was closed to other visitors. He was given a tour, and one of the things that he would have seen was a painting in the Tudor World Room, which was commissioned by King Henry VIII, and it shows the four evangelists stoning the Pope for his hypocrisy and avarice. I don't know quite how that went down, but there's other coverage here. The Times, for instance, quoting two local women who were stopped by police, and one of them says, "I told the police we're just two old ladies, we're hardly terrorists," but other sort of in anecdotes as well. American officials apparently were overheard at one roadblock mimicking a British accent and asking each other about hoping to try a bacon butty and a Sunday dinner during their trip. This being the Cotswolds, that I imagine would be a very expensive bacon butty with organic bacon and sourdough bread or something.
And let us not forget that Hampton Court is was the gilded residence of a philandering ruler known for his loose morals and his volatile judgment.
I can't imagine who you're referring to there.
But Vance has also been on Fox News, and he's been talking about the Epstein files again.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's interesting that just when you thought that one had died, he, according to The Guardian, seems to have revived that controversy. Yeah, as you say, this interview in Fox News, he tried to blame the Democrats, accusing Joe Biden of doing, quote, absolutely nothing about the scandal when he was in the White House. But unfortunately, as I say, this has revived the scandal, the interest to some extent, and there have been renewed calls not just by Democrats, but also by some Republicans to release the files. I think it's also interesting the way Vance has presumably been deployed to put some context, to lower expectations about Trump's meeting with Putin. According to Reuters, J.D. Vance has said that a negotiated settlement between Russia and Ukraine was unlikely to satisfy either side, and that any peace deal would leave both Moscow and Kyiv unhappy. I have to say, it does look like, from what we're hearing, that it's going to be Kyiv that is much more unhappy than Moscow. But as I say...
But he's preparing us all for failure, isn't he?
Absolutely. He's out there, as I say, putting things into context, doing a bit of spinning, I think, really. But I think it's interesting as well, meanwhile, you can see how the British government, with this connection with David Lammy, is trying is going for a sort of dual strategy, if you like. Whatever happens in Alaska later this week, they hope they've got this communications channel open now with the Vice President, and perhaps via David Lammy, via the UK, Europe can put some more pressure on the US to really help Ukraine.
Because there was a tremendous amount of discussion over the weekend between Zelensky and various European leaders, all trying to kind of come up with a plan, an alternative plan that Europe can present, and to try and ensure that Zelensky is at that meeting. I mean, it seems inconceivable that Russia and America can make a deal without Ukraine's direct involvement.
Well, absolutely. And can they at all? I mean, this would be, as you say, this would be ridiculous. We've got these two negotiations going on, but don't forget that, I mean, even if Trump gifted Putin that great chunk of Ukraine, and it does look like he's planning to do that, Ukraine would still have to have a referendum in order for the government to accept that about a fifth of the country would disappear and be part of Russia. And the other thing, I think it's interesting, there's a lot of discussion about land here. And of course, that's absolutely key. But let's not forget the people, the millions of people living in that part of the country who have suffered terribly during the war. If Russia becomes the de facto government, human rights will be obliterated. We've seen, more children will be kidnapped, rape, torture. I mean, it will only get worse for those people. Yeah. I imagine, we'd see an exodus, which would be terrible, of course. Yeah.
Very quick look, Simon, on Friedrich Merz's first 100 days in office.
Yeah, I think there's a kind of, exactly. So that the polling is not good for him. A poll published in Bild am Sonntag shows that his approval ratings are now even less than they were for Olaf Scholz, which was his ill-starred social democratic predecessor. There's gloom about the economy, but I think what's also interesting here, he's being criticised for being an Außenkanzler, a foreign affairs chancellor. So we're just talking about foreign affairs, and I think there's a foreign affairs element here. A lot of Germans are clearly unhappy about the way he is expecting them to take to the international stage.
Simon Brooke, thank you very much indeed. This is The Globalist. It's 9:20 in Jerusalem, 7:20 here in London. A UN emergency meeting took place yesterday to discuss Israel's plan for a military operation to take full control of Gaza City. Netanyahu says it's the best way to end the war, adding,
"Our goal is not to occupy Gaza. Our goal is to free Gaza. Free it from Hamas terrorists."
Well, this is yet another escalation in the conflict sparked by the Hamas attacks on October the 7th, 2023. I'm joined now by Leila Malana Allen, who's Monocle's Middle East correspondent. Leila, many thanks for joining us. This plan is scaled back from the original suggestion of taking over the whole of the Strip. Has it been agreed by the cabinet?
This part has been it's by the Israeli Security Cabinet, and now it has to go through the next stage, which has been to be approved by the entire Israeli government, essentially. But it has been scaled back in that it's only going to be Gaza City and the surrounding areas. But there is still concern that that would be the beginning of the implementation of this plan across all of the Gaza Strip. Essentially what this will mean is moving nearly 1 million people down to the south of Gaza. Now, this has been the plan of the Israeli government for quite a long time. One of the reasons why the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation has all of its 4 aid points set up in the south of the Gaza Strip is that the idea for the past few months has been to encourage Palestinians in Gaza to move down south in preparation for this plan. And even before this new plan for a military assault, potentially occupation, was announced, the Israeli government had been saying that they wanted to build essentially a camp, what many people are calling an internment camp for Palestinians in the south of Gaza. So it does look like that will now move ahead, and potentially even before the UN General Assembly in September, where, of course, we expect multiple Western leaders to propose that they will now recognise a state of Palestine, which would, of course, include Gaza.
Now, Netanyahu has been hugely attacked for this plan. He says that the territory will not be run by either Hamas or the Palestinian Authority, but by an alternative civil administration. Who would that be?
Well, this again is another question. So there's great concern that essentially what Israel is doing is moving entirely away from the international community, from received wisdom on being an occupied force, on international law, from essentially engaging at all with other international leaders and institutions on how this is run. The Palestinian Authority is a system that was set up, that is internationally recognized. While it does now not have that much legitimacy among a lot of Palestinians because they feel that it's an organization that hasn't really fought for them, it is still the only existing one that's sort of been internationally agreed that would be able to lead any form of Palestinian state. What Israel essentially seems to be doing, much in the way that it has with the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, where it said, we no longer trust the UN. We've decided the UN allows Hamas to get aid without really any evidence of that. We are going to create our own way of administering aid, which has been the GHF, which, of course, more than 1,000 people have been killed trying to pick up aid. It has been condemned around the world by NGOs, by governments. They now seem to be doing the same thing with this plan for whoever is going to administer Gaza. Is that going to be a force that is created by Israel? Is that going to have any legitimacy among Palestinians? One of the issues, of course, is that there has been no real opportunity for young Palestinians to express peaceful political views and build a peaceful political movement within the Palestinian territories. And so there aren't really obvious leaders who don't have any connections to organizations like Hamas or Palestinian Jihad or the Palestine Liberation Organization who would be able to lead a government like this. They've been extremely unclear on where this would come from and why it would have legitimacy in the eyes of Palestinians and the world.
How have Israelis reacted? We understand that there were demonstrations in Tel Aviv.
There are increasing numbers of demonstrations. Now, of course, we've long seen demonstrations against the war in Gaza from the families of the hostages and sort of their supporters saying, this is not the way to get the hostages back. You are directly putting our hostages at risk. Of course, there are 50 hostages left in Gaza. We think 20 of them still living. And of course, those families are absolutely terrified that a renewed military assault on Gaza is only going to put their family members more at risk and is unlikely to get them back alive. Now, what we're seeing in addition to those protests, and have been seeing for the last few months, is a lot of Israelis starting to take to the streets saying, we do not want any more Palestinians killed. We do not want this happening in our name. We do not want children in Gaza being starved in our name. So the government is really coming under intense pressure not to go through with this plan. But Netanyahu is stuck between two sides, as he has been really for this whole war, but increasingly so. He is in this right-wing coalition that he's now been in power with for several years, the only way he was able to form government after the last election. And in that coalition, the members of the most right-wing parties who put huge amount of pressure on him to continue the war, now with this occupation, they say that they will resign from the government, and the government as a result will collapse if he doesn't go ahead with these plans. And on the other side, you have an increasing number of Israeli civilians saying they are against this war, they are against the occupation, they are against a renewal of hostilities and a new assault on Gaza. So he really is trapped between those two, but thus far seems to be burying his head in the sand. Yesterday, he came forward in a very rare press conference directly in front of foreign journalists as well as Israeli journalists to react to that emergency meeting of the Security Council. Essentially, he said, I'm here to puncture the lies. He is doubling down on the fact that he says everything that's been said about people being killed while getting aid is a lie. It's a lie that any Palestinians are starving in Gaza. The only people who are being starved are the hostages by Hamas. And doubling down again on the way that the only way to get Hamas out of Gaza is with a renewed military offensive. So thus far, he doesn't really seem to be engaging with those protests from his own citizens at all.
There seems to be some muttering from the IDF itself. So what is the Israeli military saying? And I wonder if they will obey orders. Could this spark internal conflict between the government and the military?
It absolutely could. And it's really important to remember that before October 7th, we were seeing huge protests against the government. Throughout June, July and August 2023, tens of thousands of people were taking to the streets against this government and against a lot of their military plans. And a lot of those people were military veterans. And that is now happening again. There are multiple organizations in Israel made up of IDF veterans who say, they've been traumatized by experiences that they had while in the occupied territories, that they are against this war. And we actually saw this past weekend big protests in Tel Aviv that included over 400 military and Air Force veterans who were protesting against this. Now, in terms of the currently serving members of the IDF, Ayal Zamir, who is the head of the IDF, while he initially proposed a plan for a renewed assault on Gaza, his plan was much smaller and he wanted to take it much more slowly. And he has responded to Netanyahu's idea for an expanded and speedier offensive by saying, it's a very bad idea. The likelihood is we are going to lose a lot of troops and it's not going to, be good for our war aims, essentially. And the other thing he's said, and that is being echoed by quite a lot of experienced veterans within the IDF, is we're using a huge number of fresh recruits and people who've come back who aren't normally serving in the military, who have come back after their military service. Everyone is exhausted. They've been fighting on multiple fronts because, of course, they're fighting in Lebanon and Syria as well as being deployed in parts of the West Bank too. We're going to have to redeploy people from somewhere else in order to bring them to fight in Gaza. And the reality is the military needs a bit of a break, and this isn't going to be popular with soldiers or their families. So there is quite a lot of resistance within the IDF to doubling down again on even not just a renewed offensive and assault, and a huge one, on, as it will be on Gaza City, but the idea that there's then going to be occupying forces again, that a lot of these forces will stay inside Gaza.
Now, of course, there have been huge reactions from around the world. The UN, as we were talking about, big declaration came out of that. Germany, formerly a key Israeli ally, has suspended arms exports that could be used in Gaza. Europe is really weighing in. The US, fairly significant by its absence here. But one thing that I think might tip the balance even more is the killing of this Al Jazeera journalist, Anas al-Sharif. What do you know about that?
So Anas is one of the most famous journalists in Gaza. 28 years old. He has worked relentlessly throughout this war, reporting every single day on what's been happening, rarely seeing his family. He, of course, became extremely famous in the ceasefire. When the ceasefire was announced in Gaza, on screen, he took off his flak jacket, nearly in tears, and said, for the first time, I can take off this shield and feel safe again. And of course, then the war started again and he was unable to. Now, he was killed along with 4 other journalists from Al Jazeera. All 5 of them were in a media tent, a very clearly designated media tent that everyone knew about outside Al-Shifa hospital. And the Israeli government has not denied that they targeted him. They have openly said that they targeted him in order to kill him and the other journalists that were with him. They accused him of being a member of Hamas without any real evidence. And in fact, the Committee to Protect Journalists just last month put out a statement saying they were gravely concerned about Anas's safety because of a smear campaign by the Israeli military institution to try and essentially, they said, fabricate in advance evidence to justify his killing. So there's extensive evidence that he was targeted. Obviously, the others who were killed with him, also journalists. That's 5 more of our colleagues. More than 200 journalists have now been killed inside Gaza. And there's an outcry around the world about the fact that Israel is targeting journalists. There's extensive evidence for that. And simply labeling all journalists Hamas in order to be able to target them is completely illegitimate and has been condemned already by multiple institutions, by multiple governments. So this very possibly could move the needle. Increasingly, people are coming to understand that just because the Israeli government, the IDF, puts out a statement saying that somebody is linked to Hamas and doesn't really provide evidence, that can no longer really be taken at face value in this situation, which is what multiple institutions are saying.
Leila, stay safe. Thank you. That's Leila Malala Allen there, our Middle East correspondent. Now, still to come on the programme.
Nationalism is shining brightly across Bangkok at the moment, as a growing number of digital billboards display the Thai flag instead of the usual videos for beauty products, fashion brands and electric cars.
We'll hear more from our Asia editor, James Chambers. This is The Globalist. Now, here's what else we're keeping an eye on today. Israel's military has confirmed it killed Al Jazeera journalist Anas al-Sharif in a Gaza airstrike, claiming he was a Hamas cell leader. But rights groups say he was targeted for his frontline reporting and that the allegation lacks evidence. Australia will recognise a Palestinian state, joining France, Britain and Canada, while New Zealand's Prime Minister Christopher Luxon says his cabinet will decide in September and present the government's approach at the United Nations Leaders' Week. United States President Donald Trump has pledged to remove homeless people and jail offenders from Washington, D.C., with plans emerging to deploy hundreds of National Guard troops to the capital over the objection of local officials. And the presidents of South Korea and Vietnam have agreed to deepen economic and strategic cooperation during a summit today in Seoul. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. Now for a look behind the headlines. Monocle's Asia editor in Bangkok, James Chambers, reports on some noticeable changes in the Thai capital billboards.
Nationalism is shining brightly across Bangkok at the moment, as a growing number of digital billboards display the Thai flag instead of the usual videos for beauty products, fashion brands and electric cars. Some of Thailand's largest corporations want to show their support for the army after its recent border clashes with neighbouring Cambodia by committing their outdoor advertising space to the cause, alongside the usual contributions of money, food and other essential provisions. Seeing the illuminated red, white and blue of the Thai flag on the side of huge towers, roads and shopping malls is an eye-catching display of modern patriotism. But all of this digital flag flying is also drawing attention to the prevalence of these giant LED screens, some the size of an entire city block, at what is an interesting time for the outdoor advertising industry. Bangkok's governor, Chadchat Sitipun, wants to improve quality of life in the Thai capital by establishing a clear limit on the daytime illumination levels of digital billboards and reducing their maximum brightness at night. City Hall is concerned about light pollution for residents and the number of traffic accidents caused by distracted drivers. Needless to say, outdoor advertising in Bangkok is not about to go dark. Not by a long shot, and certainly not right now. But as with many things in Thailand, a little regulation is needed to find a healthier balance. For Monocle in Bangkok, I'm James Chambers.
Thanks, James. And for more from Monocle's editors and correspondents around the world, do sign up for our free daily newsletter, The Monocle Minute, at monocle.com/minute. It's 8:34 in Zurich, 7:34 here in London. Now, Switzerland was shocked last week when the US imposed tariffs of 39% on the country, prompting the president to fly to Washington for last-ditch talks, ultimately unsuccessful, to prevent this from happening. Well, I'm joined now by Gorana Gerdic, Monocle's security correspondent, who's in our Zurich studio. Gorana, can you recap what happened and how President Karen Keller-Sutter has tried to deal with it?
Well, we have to understand, of course, that the tariffs on Switzerland are not a one-off. They come part of what's been happening and what's been announced since April the 2nd, which was dubbed the US Liberation Day. And of course, all of these extensions that then basically expired on the tariffs that the US would impose on countries with which it wasn't able to strike a deal before August the 1st. So in this period, the Swiss government had a lot of concerted efforts, whether on part of the president, who also heads basically, or who has been in charge of the economic department earlier, as well as other representatives going to DC to try to negotiate a deal to basically avoid getting slapped with tariffs that actually were quite out of proportion of what most of Europe was facing. And indeed, we know that European Union, or for instance, the UK, have managed to get deals that are much better of 15 and 10% respectively. So basically, what has now happened is that there hasn't been a deal. Switzerland, on incidentally the Swiss National Day, got this 39% tariff, and now there is a lot of political fallout, and of course the number crunching has started, how this might impact Swiss economy moving forward.
So some Swiss politicians are talking about cancelling a deal to buy F-35 fighter jets from the US. Just tell us about that and how it feeds into Switzerland's defence policy more widely.
Correct. So we've now had reports of various actually sides of the political spectrum, you know, politicians representing everyone from the Greens to the sort of more nationalist options, really kind of using this as a moment to reflect whether it was a good idea to pen this deal to get 36 F-35s back in 2021, a deal that was actually just a couple of months ago starting to prove quite controversial, given that the price that was initially agreed on the purchase has been raised by about 1 billion Swiss francs. So initially it was 6 billion Swiss francs, and then now US basically said because of the rise in some of the raw materials that this would have to go up. So anyway, we've heard some of the MPs already saying that if a country throws rocks at us in trade, we shouldn't give them a present, essentially. So this was a paraphrase of what one Green MP said with respect to the sort of fallout of the tariffs being imposed. What I would say here is that when it comes to defense procurement, these processes are extremely long. And we have to just recall that Switzerland has been in this sort of process of trying to deal with how they replace what has been the aging aircraft already for some well over a decade. So in 2014, there was a basically a rejection of the Saab Gripen procurement. Then there were a couple of rounds of evaluations of Rafale and Eurofighters. And then in 21, basically after a very narrow referendum vote, it was decided that F-35s would be procured. If this process goes back to the drawing board, it would be hard to see how Switzerland would meet the sort of deadline in early 2030s when it needs to replace what is now starting to become a quite aging fleet.
Gorana, thank you very much indeed. That's Gorana Gurgic, who is Monocle's security correspondent. Thank you very much. This is The Globalist on Monocle Radio. Europe may pride itself on its culture, creativity and innovation, but it still trails far behind the United States and China when it comes to creating tech giants. Ulrich Knudsen, Deputy Secretary-General of the OECD and Chief Corporate Affairs Officer at Netcompany, one of Europe's fastest-growing IT companies, warns that this gap leaves the continent dangerously dependent on others. Monocle's contributing editor Andrew Muller spoke to Knudsen to find out why he thinks Europe must make major investments in both defence and digital infrastructure, and began by asking him to explain Netcompany's role.
Well, the ambition, I say with half a smile, is to create Europe's first tech giant. We've talked about the American big tech for so long, and we've wondered why is it that Europe doesn't have any tech giants. And Netcompany is aspiring to be one. We need more European solutions for digital transformation, run on European data, built by European companies, but also maybe accountable to European citizens and European values. And that is what Netcompany, that's before I joined, succeeded in doing in Denmark, where it's now by far the biggest IT services company, and growing into Europe with approximately 9,000 employees now. So it's about providing responsible digital transformation to Europe through digital solutions and digital platforms, if you want to coin it in one sentence.
You mentioned earlier that fact, which I know annoys Europeans mostly because Americans really enjoy beating Europeans over the head with it, that there isn't a European tech giant. There's that phrase that I'm sure you're wearily familiar with, that America innovates and Europe merely regulates. But is it as simple as that? Why have the Americans stolen such a march on Europe in this respect?
I don't think it's as simple as that, but we also have to recognize that the Americans have created a business environment, not least in Silicon Valley, that has allowed them to produce these tech giants, and we have to look inward in UK, in Europe, to see why it is that we haven't done the same. I don't think it's for lack of innovation powers, for creativity, for talent, but we've not been good enough in Europe at commercializing it. My company, Netcompany, is attempting to do that alongside other promising European companies. But I think we also need a little bit of help from European regulators. I don't buy the fact that it's only regulation and bureaucracy standing in the way. I think there are more factors at play, but certainly easier, more smart regulation could help. But maybe it's also a mindset issue that some of the promising tech entrepreneurs in Europe have been bought by, well, exactly the five big tech or the seven magnificent US companies. And maybe we need to be better at scaling companies in Europe. And I think the European single market, the digital single market, could help.
Europe has been learning the hard way quite briskly in recent months that perhaps it can't leave quite a lot of things to the United States and its endless goodwill and generosity. Do you think this is another one of those things?
I do. I think it's blatantly clear now that Europe has to learn to stand on its own feet. And that means for me, big-time investments in defense and big-time investments in digital infrastructure. I think we need to achieve more European, probably also more British, digital sovereignty, but that should not be turned into digital protectionism. I don't think we should, neither could we, abandon big tech products from one day to the other. That is against the globalization that has made all of our countries so successful. But we need to be a little bit more mindful about the dependency we have on American tech. And I think I think that what we've seen over the last 3 or 4 years has made it even more important for Europe to really embrace the digital transformation. And I see maybe 4 layers of reasoning for this. The first one is the eternal one. We want to make life easier for our businesses and for our consumers, for voters, citizens, through better use of tech and digital. The second one is that this long-standing discussion of why UK and Europe have fallen so much behind US and China. I mean, we need to, if we want to create growth, productivity and competitiveness again in Europe, the digital transformation, I think, is the go-to source for more growth. The third one is that if we are to afford investing in our own security, we need the growth to go with it. We cannot tackle climate, demography, defense, budgetary burdens at the same time if we do not have growth. My last point here is, if we don't want our children and grandchildren to grow up, they will grow up in a highly, thoroughly digitized world. If we don't want that world to be painted in the image, if you like, of Trump and Xi and Putin, Europe has to get at the frontier of new technologies. Otherwise, this digitized tomorrow will not be underpinned by European, you could say former Western values. It'll be underpinned by the values that are prevalent in other parts of the world.
Do you find yourself personally feeling surprised by the urgency with which this challenge has descended? Because you worked previously, of course, in the Danish Foreign Service. Well, you ran the Danish Foreign Service. You were a foreign policy advisor to 2 Danish prime ministers, ambassador to the OECD, which I'm guessing were somewhat slower moving environments. Do you feel now, looking back on those periods, that people were not able to see or not wanting to see what was coming?
I think both in terms of taking responsibility for our defense and digital future, we were probably a little bit too complacent. We were betting on 2 things: the threat from the East, from Russia, from Kremlin, to be over from 1989 to 2022, and we were betting on the US to come save us if that threat ever materialized. Now, those 2 premises, those 2 preconditions for European complacency are gone now. We know there is a threat from the East, and we are not sure if we can rely totally on the US coming to save us, even in security terms. And that together, I think, has been a pretty harsh wake-up call for European leaders over the last 3 months to 3 years, if you like. And this is why I think there is a European reawakening, if you like, that we have to be able to do more on our own. Part of that does not necessarily collide with the American view of Europe. They also think we need to do more on our own. Maybe not by abandoning American tech, and I'm not saying we should, but we should create more choice. There has to be more choice for European businesses, consumers and governments.
That was the Secretary-General of the OECD, Ulrich Knudsen, speaking to Monocle's contributing editor, Andrew Muller. This is The Globalist on Monocle Radio.
IQ, EQ, and AI. 3 components key to the craft of innovation at UBS. Because to stay ahead in a rapidly evolving age, you need a partner with decades of experience, endless passion for the work, and a finger on the pulse of leading technologies, bridging human expertise with artificial intelligence, all to elevate you. UBS. Banking is our craft.
Well, I'm joined now by the Greek journalist, Emmanuel Papavasiliou, who is luckily in the studio here at Midori House with me. Manos, you brought the Greek weather with you. Thank you for coming in.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here, Georgina.
Now, tell us, what's this farm scandal that's currently engulfing Greece?
So there's a scandal of Greece's agricultural subsidy agency called OPEKEPE, which is continuing to cast a shadow over the government. Now, this is an issue I previously mentioned on this show, but for those who don't know, it is a large-scale fraud scheme concerning EU agricultural subsidies. So a big amount of individuals made false claims in order to get agricultural subsidies, basically money from the EU, and this was huge amount of money taken from them. This involves false livestock declarations, for example, in Crete. People are acting like they have loads of sheep, or also like there's been fake banana plantations in Mount Olympus, just to make you understand. So this has led the European Commission to impose a fine of 415 million euros to Greece for systematic administrative failures. Now, the government has used its majority to block a full-scale investigation because, as it happens, more and more it appears that people from inside the government have been complicit to this and they're trying to save them. So recent polls have revealed that this has done a lot of damage to the government's ratings, which was hoping to head into the summer recess in a better note, because next month is the Thessaloniki International Fair, the place where they show the budget and all the things that they need to do next. And now they're scrambling to come up with a response. Their response right now is to form a parliamentary committee to look into the matter. But the opposition parties don't want to be in it. They're still weighing into their response because they are saying that their participation could legitimize what they see as a flawed process.
Now, Greece is also on fire, like much of Europe. Tell us about these awful wildfires.
Yes, this is something that dominates the news now every August, because we have super high heat and also we have strong gale force winds, and as a result, there's wildfires all the time. Now, the most serious front broke out near Kerater and the outskirts of Athens last Friday. We're talking about more than 1,500 hectares being burned. There's other wildfires in Peloponnese, also in Chios and Tinos Islands right now. It's not that the government isn't doing much. In fact, they've spent a lot of money there. The response has been insane. There's been like hundreds of fire engines, planes, helicopters, etc. However, it is the fact that because of the environment, this is getting harder and harder to deal with. And as a result, Greece is now bracing for more extreme weather.
Yeah, and of course those strong winds, bad for fires, but good for kiteboarders.
Good for kiteboarders because, in fact, although we have this issue with the wildfires caused by strong winds, apparently Athens has now, this summer, has become a hub for kitesurfing. At the Agios Nikolaos beach near Artemida, which is near the airport, apparently dozens of kiteboarders this year have seized the winds to do like all their tricks and stuff because it's like perfect conditions. Usually they go into islands for this. There's a big tourism scene for kite surfing in the islands. However, this year Athens has been the spot.
Excellent. Manos, thank you so much for coming in to speak to us. That's Emmanuel Papavasiliou there, and you're listening to The Globalist on Monocle Radio. In the UAE, as the population turns to weight loss drugs to reduce size, there are also slimmer pickings for restaurants, which are now adapting their menus accordingly. Well, I'm joined now from Dubai by Inzamam Rashid, who's Monocle's Gulf correspondent. Inzi, hello to you. Is there an obesity crisis in Dubai? Why has the weight of the population been creeping up? And how popular are these GLP-1 drugs like Ozempic and Mounjaro?
Look, it probably there's two elements to this, probably, Georgina. Good morning. There is one side where the kind of Arabic food and what locals eat here in the Middle East is probably quite heavy. A lot of oils used, clarified butter, ghee used in a lot of the cooking as well. So there's that element, but also for all the expats that arrive to Dubai, there is this thing when you arrive, and for the first year, you usually put on a stone. It's called a Dubai stone because of the sheer amount of amazing food that the UAE offers in terms of its fine dining restaurants, its kind of brunches that you end up going out to every weekend, but also the incredible delivery service that the UAE offers as well. You can literally get any kind of food at any time of the day, wherever you are. I mean, even if you're on the yacht in the middle of the Arabian Peninsula, you can get someone delivering food to you as well. It's bizarre. And that's probably something to do with the fact that a lot of people are putting on weight whilst out here in the UAE. And as a result, many people are then turning to these weight loss drugs like Ozempic and Wegovy and Mounjaro, which seems to be the very popular one out here in the UAE.
So a lot of people on those drugs, and presumably this is affecting the restaurant trade. So how are restaurants coping with the rise of these medications, which shrink people's appetites?
Well, that's the thing. As appetites shrink, I think menus are beginning to evolve out here in the UAE. And there's one particular restaurant which has actually noticed, well, people are coming and probably not eating as much food, and then are probably leaving a bit miffed because they're having to pay a full bill and not finishing off the food. And doggy bags aren't really a thing out here. You don't see people walking away with their leftover Wagyu steaks in a little brown carry paper bag. So a Mediterranean restaurant called The Bank, which is in downtown Dubai, has launched a mini banker menu, which basically is small portions of its most popular dishes, and that's to cater to those diners who are on those weight loss injections like Ozempic, Wegovy and Mounjaro. And the offerings include basically half portions of grilled sea bream and barbecue melt chicken, a reduced size in starters like the lamb kebab or the tiger prawns, and they also include the cocktails as well. They've innovated their cocktail menu into mini cocktails. So they've got the Fussy Cat, the Pretty Little Pink, all reflecting kind of reduced alcohol cravings around those people who use these weight loss drugs. This was initially trialled in the UK, in London, but then the concept launched in Dubai as a response to the changing dining habits as a result of people taking these drugs. And actually, what the restaurant have said is that they did this on the back of some market research that was done, where it actually suggested that people who were taking weight loss drugs were unsatisfied with the amount of money that they were paying at restaurants, i.e. full price for meals that they weren't fully eating. And so the restaurant noticed this and decided that they should introduce this mini and reduced size menu.
So as you say, this started in London, it's been happening in Dubai. Are we seeing this trend reflected in hospitality outlets in the rest of the world?
Potentially. The United States also introduced something like this as well. And I think it's something that could potentially be picked up wider across the world as well. So there was an article in the New York Times suggesting that there were other outlets in the US doing this as well. So I think perhaps smaller portions are reflecting a bit of a broader cultural shift as well, perhaps a newfound discretion. I think you could potentially see it as. And I think next time you're dining out in Dubai or New York, I won't be surprised if your plate and your pour arrives a little bit smaller. Maybe it's something that other restaurants will be taking on in the future as well.
Well, I mean, US portions are so huge anyway. It's no bad thing.
Massive.
I wonder what impact this is likely to have on fast food outlets who generally serve pretty high calorie meals. I mean, I think this is one of the unintended consequences, along with clothing sizes dropping off people.
Yeah, that's interesting because you do go to New York and even here in Dubai, and you go to the fast food outlets and you often compare the size of the drink you get or the portion of fries that you get to other countries. And I know that in the UK, it's a large portion is a lot smaller than what a large portion here in Dubai is. You go to US, you can get supersized portions as well. But what I think potentially could be brought in place, and this is if some of those fast food chains think it's something that they want to bring on, is maybe kind of 1 ounce hamburgers on baby buns. Even you'd think, kind of a very small, like few fries in a meal as well, a very small kind of shot of Coca-Cola or whatever it may be. And I think, it'd be interesting to see whether this is a trend that those fast food outlets would introduce. If there's anywhere in the world that's going to do it first, I can guarantee you that it would be Dubai.
And Inzi, tell me, and this is my sneaky way of finding out, what are you having for breakfast?
Oh, well, it varies every single day. You could go from a shakshuka, a traditional kind of Middle Eastern breakfast. You could get a nice croissant and a coffee at a lovely baker's down the road.
Okay, I'm getting it. I'm getting it. You're not taking them then, are you?
Well, you know, I'll tell you one thing, and I'll be very, very honest.
And quick,
it's a conversation that I've had with the doctors, and it's very, very easy to get. That's all I can say.
Inzamam Rashid, thank you very much for joining us. What I will say is I am now going off to have my breakfast of one quail's egg. That's all we have for today's programme. Thanks to our producers Anita Riotta, Laura Kramer and Hassan Anderson, our researcher Henry King, and our studio manager Mariella Bevan, with editing assistance from Hunter Wang. After the headlines, there's more music on the way, and I'll be back on The Briefing live at midday in London and on The Globalist at the same time tomorrow. I'm Georgina Godwin. Thank you for listening.